Good morning and welcome back to Herd Immunity, where wisdom is your best defense. Today's topic has to do with the asymptomatic patient with a SARS CoV-2 infection. The real question is, how many people who are infected with SARS CoV-2 are asymptomatic? That is, they have no symptoms whatsoever. They feel fine. Dr. Daniel Oren, attempted to answer this question in a paper that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in May 2021. I'll leave the link below in the description box. And he asked the question, what portion of patients with SARS CoV-2 infection are asymptomatic? And his was a systematic review. He looked at 14 different studies. The largest was a study performed in England in over 365,000 people. A second study was done in Spain, over 61,000 people. Dr. Oren analyzed the available data, and he came to the conclusion that 1/3 of the people who are infected with SARS are asymptomatic. 1/3. Now, 1/3 may not sound like a very large number, but if I were to bake for you one of my delicious apple pies, and I said, would you like a piece of pie? And you said, yeah, sure. And I cut a slice 1/3 the size of the pie, and I put that on the plate, it would look to be like a mighty big slice. And in fact, it would be a mighty big slice, and you would be very happy, and I'm quite sure that you would eat the whole thing, as would I. 1/3 of patients with a SARS CoV-2 infection are asymptomatic, and so they're fine. That's obviously not a problem for them, and it's not going to be a problem for the physicians who treat them. And it may or may not be a problem for policymakers. The real question and the real problem comes in when we consider how many people would an asymptomatic person who has a SARS CoV-2 infection infect. Are they able to infect other people? The answer is yes. Is there a way for us to understand how many people they might infect? What is the risk? And the simple answer and the sad answer is no. There's no way for us to answer that question right now. How many people would someone with a SARS CoV-2 infection who's asymptomatic, how many people would they infect? The risk being that they might infect someone who would not be asymptomatic. They might become sick. They might become desperately ill. They might die. They might go on to develop long-haul COVID disease. So this is actually a question that needs to be answered, but at this point we can't answer it. And the question is, why can't we answer that question now? A lot of questions. The reason is we'd have to start with a reliable COVID test, right? We'd have to have a test that we could rely on that would be accurate in determining the patients who are positive and are infected from those who are not. And to date, we don't have a test that is accurate enough to be able to say, you've got an infection with SARS CoV-2 and you do not. So we'd have to start with that. Then we would have to test a large number of people and keep track of the patients who tested positive, have to keep testing them, and then test their contacts, the people that they came in contact with. And you'd have to be able to do that, to surveil those contacts very closely so that you'd be able to say, well, this person who was asymptomatic, tested positive, has no symptoms, definitely infected 2 other people. Those other 2 people did not get it from somebody else. You can imagine now we are in very murky territory. It's very, very difficult to say to what extent someone who's infected with SARS CoV-2, who is asymptomatic, is at risk of passing the virus on to other people. It's not zero. The risk is not zero. It does not appear to be very high, but where we are, definitely in the data do not exist right now. And so we cannot assess that. there's another important fact I want you to keep in mind here, which is now we're getting information from Israel and soon from the UK with regard to Delta COVID, and we are seeing that as many as 50% of the patients who are coming down with Delta COVID have been fully vaccinated. So I know this is a little bit confusing, but I don't want you to be reassured to think that, oh, if I go to this camp, or I send my child to this camp and all of the counselors have been vaccinated, that my child, who's not been vaccinated because, say, my child's 8 years old or 10 years old, is not eligible for vaccination, my child is safe. Your child is not safe, because we're seeing, at least in the case of Delta, that fully vaccinated people can become ill with Delta COVID, and they can certainly pass it on to someone else, including potentially children. So it's very challenging right now to make informed decisions about how you need to conduct yourself for the purposes of keeping yourself safe, to what extent you want to protect your children and keep your children safe. If we had better data, I'm sure we would be happy to share it with you, but we don't have it right now. I think we can be somewhat assured that 1/3 of the population who is infected with SARS are asymptomatic, so they're not even suffering. That the risk of those people passing on SARS infection is relatively small, to the best of our knowledge. It's not zero. And within the context of trying to assess this risk, we do know that we're facing a Delta variant infestation, as it were, and that people who are fully vaccinated are not protected. You need to know that. As a policymaker, you could say, well, the protection would be 60% or 80% or 90% or 50%, whatever. But as I said in the previous video, you want to know about you. You're either 0 or 100% involved in this problem at the present time and going forward. So there you go. That's it for today. I wish I could be more definitive, but that's what we have. That's what we have in front of us. Those are the facts. Those are the cards on the table, and we have to play them as they're dealt. Remember, the two best medicines are love and mercy. And until I see you again, God bless.